Hello, and welcome to ISO Buckets. I'm your host, Nate Friesen. Thanks for downloading and listening to the show. If you want to be notified when a new episode drops, make sure you're subscribed to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, feel free to follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at ISO Buckets. This week, I'm going to be talking about a number of exciting things that happened in and around the NBA this week, most notably the pending Rookie of the Year race, some of the buyout market guys, as well as some of the playoff races to watch for down the stretch of the season. With that being said, let's get started. Let's get right into it with the Rookie of the Year race. So the Rookie of the Year race, right now, over the last couple of weeks, it's been getting like a lot of talk due to Zion's return mostly. And so I guess people are mostly wondering, basically, does Zion have a chance? Or has Morant pretty much locked it up? Because he's been playing all season long. He's been he's been incredibly good, borderline all-star good, and he's been super consistent, whereas Zion has only played a handful of games, and I think the most games he can play is something like 32 or 33 games. So, yeah, everyone's wondering, like, does Zion have a chance, or is it already Morant's award to lose? And I've seen like a lot of people kind of comparing it to the Joel Embiid Malcolm Brogdon race in 2017, where Malcolm Brogdon was like solid all season long, played like had a really good rookie season for the Bucks, and played like over 70 games, really consistent. And on the other hand, there was Embiid, who missed most of the season, was in and out of the lineup, only played 30-something games, and Brogdon ended up winning simply because he played more games. But people still argue that Embiid should have won that because he was the better player, and obviously is the better player still. But to me, this race is honestly not comparable to Embiid and Brogdon, simply because Brogdon is a really good player, a really solid starting point guard, but I don't think he'll ever become an all-star. This was kind of his one chance. He could still get better, and he could prove me wrong, but even if he does make one or two all-star teams, he's not even close to Embiid, who is a potential MVP in the future. To me, this race between Zion and Ja this year is a lot more comparable to the Rookie of the Year race in 2013 between Anthony Davis and Damian Lillard, where Anthony Davis, who was the number one pick, similar to Zion, came in. He was clearly the more talented player, but was kind of in and out of the lineup all season with injuries. Didn't end up playing quite enough games, and whereas Damian Lillard played the whole season and was really consistent, really good, and he ended up winning Rookie of the Year. So I just think, looking back now, people aren't saying Anthony Davis should have won Rookie of the Year in 2013. No one really cares, because both Damian Lillard and Anthony Davis are multiple-time All-Stars. Both have been in MVP conversations on a number of occasions and could still win an MVP. They're still only in their 8th season in the league. So, but yeah, both probably going to go down as Hall of Famers, which I think is somewhat similar to the Zion and Ja race right now. I just think it's not really going to matter who wins. If you want to give it to Zion because, yeah, he's the more talented player, cool. If you want to give it to Ja because he's been more consistent, played more games, whatever, cool. I just think in 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to say, oh, cool, Morant, or oh, cool, Zion Williamson won Rookie of the Year in 2020. And both these guys are 4 or 5 time All-Stars at this time. no one even cares about a Rookie of the Year award when you have so many bigger accomplishments later on in your career. Um, yeah, so I mean, personally, to me, like it doesn't matter who wins the Rookie of the Year, and I think it's not really something worth arguing over. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be mad if Zion wins or if Ja wins. Yeah. But speaking of Damian Lillard and the Portland Trailblazers and the Grizzlies and the Pelicans, all these teams are in a pretty tight race for the 8th seed in the West. Also, the Spurs and the Kings even are staying in this pretty tight race. I mean, the Grizzlies have a decent hold on the 8th seed right now, but I mean, Portland, who is currently in the 9th seed, is 28-35, 3.5 games back of the Grizzlies. But the Grizzlies have the second most difficult schedule coming down the stretch of the season, whereas Portland has the 6th or 7th easiest schedule. So I mean, it's going to be a tight race. The Pelicans, with obviously one of the most talented rosters of these 5 teams, but I mean, they're pretty far back. I mean, they're currently sitting in 12th, 5 games back of the Grizzlies, which is no small. That's not a small gap for them to overcome over the last 20 or so games. So it's going to be tough. But I think everyone just kind of seems to either want to see the Grizzlies or the Pelicans in the playoffs because of Ja Morant and Zion Williamson. Obviously, yeah, they're both really exciting young players, and like that would be really cool to see them get kind of their first playoff experience. But personally, I think everyone should want to see the Portland Trailblazers in the playoffs. Not, I haven't seen anyone say like, oh, like I really want the Blazers in the playoffs. But I think it's honestly a no-brainer. I mean, both the Pelicans and the Grizzlies, in my opinion, are going to get swept by LeBron and the Lakers. I just think that's gonna happen. They're just not good enough. But I think we've seen in the past, Damian Lillard and the Portland Trailblazers, they pick it up a level in the playoffs. I mean, they made it to the Western Conference Finals last year, and call it a fluke if you want, but I mean, Damian Lillard in the playoffs is one of the best players in the league. And we've seen him hit big shot after big shot in the playoffs, and I think that's what you're going to want come playoff time. Sure, it'd be cool to see Ja Morant or Zion Williamson just like jumping at the gym and trying to dunk on everybody, but if it's going to be over in 4 games, that's not as exciting as Damian Lillard hitting a game winner in Game 5 to send it to Game 6 in Portland with the potential of a Game 7. You know, I mean, I think I'd rather a more exciting series with potentially Damian Lillard just kind of putting the Blazers on his back and making it a good series against the Lakers, because, I mean, that's really all that you can ask for in the first round is somewhat of a competitive series, which we hardly ever get. It seems, especially in the 1-8 matchup, it's almost always a sweep. So I think everyone should be cheering for the Blazers down the stretch, and I think they actually have a pretty good chance of making it, considering the Pelicans they haven't been winning games that they should be winning in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, as I mentioned, Damian Lillard, like one of the most entertaining performers in the playoffs. But another guy who is just wildly entertaining to watch is Russell Westbrook. And as I'm sure you guys know, Russell Westbrook over the last 2 months or so has been playing some of the best basketball of his career. Certainly the most efficient basketball of his career. I wrote an article this week actually for Fansided called Russell West 6 Reasons for Russell Westbrook's Recent Explosion in Production. So go check that out if you want to hear some more reasons why Russ may be just playing the most efficient and some of the best basketball of his career. But he is pretty much unguardable right now. I mean, we've seen teams like the Utah Jazz try and put their center on him and Rudy Gobert, and that's just kind of a joke. Russ is just sprinting right by them and torching him, getting layup after layup. We've seen the other day against the Celtics, which was a really good game. Russell Westbrook was torching him all game long, and then we've seen the Celtics try and go zone a couple times, which ideally is the best way to stop Russell Westbrook. I mean, if you got a guy just going to the rim time and time again, especially when they're spreading you out with all the shooters, it kind of makes sense to just go zone and try to just keep a guy near the rim so that you can at least somewhat try and contest these layups from Russell Westbrook. But the problem is, a team like the Rockets, if you go zone, that just leaves them open for so many more three-point opportunities, and we saw that on a few possessions in the Celtics-Rockets game. Russell Westbrook would drive, he'd get stopped at the rim, he'd just kick out, a couple swings, open three for the Rockets. So I don't know, it's tough because the best way to stop Russ is with zone, but you can't play zone against a three-point shooting team like the Rockets. So, I honestly don't know what you do to stop this Russell Westbrook and James Harden-led Rockets team. The last couple games, the Knicks and the Clippers ended up beating the Rockets, but I don't know how. The Rockets have been kind of on a tear lately, and yeah, I think it's somewhat on James Harden these last couple losses. Russ has been kind of doing all he can. Against the Clippers last night, he had 29 points, 15 rebounds, 5 assists. Not super efficient, but James Harden with only 16 points and 4 assists. James Harden has not been playing his best basketball over the last few games, and in a tough game like that against the Clippers at home, you need your best player, potential MVP candidate in James Harden to really step up and be better in a time like. Moving on now to the Boston Celtics, who I briefly mentioned when talking about the Rockets. They had a pretty good game against the Rockets. Jaylen Brown hitting a pretty crazy three to send it to overtime. But the Celtics, they've had a chance here to make it a really good race for the second seed in the Eastern Conference. Currently, they're about a game and a half back of the Raptors. The Raptors, who actually just clinched the second seed in the Eastern Conference playoffs. They clinched a playoff spot after beating the Warriors in Curry's return last night. But the Celtics, who had tough losses in home games against the Rockets and the Nets this week. If they win both those games, they're in the 2 seed right now, which those are games that they could have and should have won. Especially against the Nets. The Nets are not a good team, especially with Kyrie Irving sidelined for the rest of the season. They let Karis LeVert, who had an amazing game, but they let him score 37 points in the fourth quarter and overtime combined, which is just, they just stopped playing defense. Simple as that. And, this is going to be a really good playoff race to watch over the final stretch of the season between the Celtics and the Raptors, and even the Heat could come in and make this a 3-team race. But as it stands right now, the Celtics and the Raptors, they're going to be in for a really good race heading down the stretch of the season. If the Celtics do want to give themselves the best chance at getting that second seed, which will be incredibly helpful, they're going to need to start winning games against big opponents. And that loss to the Rockets was tough, but you're at home, and they match up pretty well against the Rockets. I think, honestly, it's on Brad Stevens to kind of figure out how to win that game. But yeah, I think one thing that's going to be really important is the whoever gets the second seed in the Eastern Conference is going to likely be matched up against a team like the Nets or the Magic, who, quite frankly, just aren't good. But whoever gets the 3 seed is likely going to face the Pacers, who are really, they could, if they catch their stride at the right time, they could be a dangerous team in the first round, especially with Victor Oladipo coming back and kind of getting back into the flow of things. So yeah, it's gonna be a good race, and I mean the 2 seed is gonna be incredibly important for either of these teams to try and have their best chance at making a run at the Eastern Conference and potentially the NBA Finals. Um, so with that being said, the Celtics and the Raptors and other teams atop the East and Western Conference, um, they could be looking at potentially some buyout guys over the next few weeks. This week we saw Alan Crabb, Anthony Tolliver, Jordan McRae, and Troy Daniels all get buyouts. Um, doesn't look like guys like Mo Harkless or Tristan Thompson are going to get bought out. Um, but the guys we also saw sign this week, as I mentioned, Tolliver, Daniels, and McRae. Tolliver ended up signing with the Grizzlies. Hopefully he can crack the rotation consistently and potentially help them in their to maintain the 8th seed. Troy Daniels signed with the Denver Nuggets. This is kind of just a move around the edges for the Nuggets, I guess, in case of injury to a guy like Will Barton or Torrey Craig or Gary Harris. They have kind of another shooter coming off the bench. Then also Jordan McRae, who initially it looked like he was going to go to the Suns, but he ended up going to the Pistons, which I actually like for the Pistons. McRae's had a pretty solid season. Looks like he could be a legit backup point guard in the NBA, and I mean it doesn't hurt the Pistons at all to kind of give him a look. I mean they're not going anywhere this season, so yeah, I think Jordan McRae to the Pistons could be good. And then lastly, on Thursday night it came out that Dion Waiters has officially signed with the Lakers, which is cool. The Lakers, I guess, are just kind of matching the Clippers. First, the Clippers signed Marcus Morris, and the Lakers signed Markieff Morris. And then the Clippers signed Reggie Jackson, and the Lakers signed Dion Waiters. I mean, they're just matching bio guy for bio guy. And, yeah, I mean, Dion Waiters could prove to be important going down the stretch of the season. I mean, he's the type of guy who, in a playoff game or in an important game in the next month or so, could just come off the bench and score 20 clutch points in a third and fourth quarter of a game and could really swing a game in a playoff series. I mean, it's probably unlikely, but he is that type of guy he can catch fire pretty easily, and I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt to have a guy like that on your roster. I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of the guys who have been playing really well this past week or so. As I mentioned a bit earlier, Karis LeVert had 51 points against the Celtics, including 37 points in the fourth quarter and overtime combined. I mean, he was just in his bag, just like hitting from everywhere, coming off screens, pulling up threes. I mean, he was getting guys in the post and just fading away with mid-range jumpers. He's getting to the basket whenever he wanted, getting to the free throw line. Yeah, he just had everything going in the fourth quarter and overtime. And I'm pretty sure he outscored the whole Celtics team in the fourth quarter and overtime, which is, I mean, I'm not sure if that says more about Karis LeVert or more about the Celtics. I tend to lean it probably says more about the Celtics. Without a guy like Kemba Walker in that game, and Jaylen Brown left the game with a hamstring injury. I mean, not to make excuses for the Celtics, but that's a tough break, and it's tough without two of your best scorers on the court to get you a bucket in the clutch minutes there. And I mean, credit to Karis LeVert, he took advantage and had a career high 51. Definitely the best game of his young career. And I mean, honestly, let's just hope that LeVert's able to stay healthy. I mean, I don't think he's played over 60 games a single time in his young NBA career, but it'd be nice to see if he can put together like a good stretch of games to finish out this season, and heading into next season, if he hopefully he can stay healthy and have himself a good season, especially alongside Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. I mean, he could potentially fill in as a solid third star beside those guys. So, I mean, hopefully he can stay healthy, and then we can see how that works out. Um, Another guy I wanted to talk about is R.J. Barrett, actually, he's been playing really well lately. He had 27 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds against the Houston Rockets the other night, and had the game-sealing bucket against P.J. Tucker, who is not an easy guy to score against. But yeah, RJ, I mean, he's been streaky this season. He's also missed a fair bit of time with injury. But, I mean, if we're able to see this RJ where he's able to hit a couple threes, I think he was 3 of 8 from 3 in that game, which is fine. If he can get to the free throw line and actually make free throws, I mean, that's been like his biggest weakness this season is free throw shooting. Yeah, I mean, we know he can get to the bucket pretty much whenever he wants. It's just about him finishing and when he not being afraid to draw the contact and go to the free throw line because, yeah, to be an elite scorer in this league, I mean, you have to be able to get to the free throw line and you got to make the most of those attempts when you get them. So yeah, RJ Barrett, I mean, he's looked good over the last week or so. Let's hope he can kind of finish out his rookie campaign strong and really go into next year on a high note. Another guy, CJ McCollum, who has been incredible without Damian Lillard in the lineup. I mean, he's looked like a legitimate number one option, which I don't think we've ever really been able to say about CJ McCollum. I mean, he's been somewhat of like a borderline all-star over the last like 3-4 years. I mean, if he was in the Eastern Conference, he might have made an all-star team by now. But, I mean, without Damian Lillard over the last couple weeks, CJ's been amazing. And, I mean, he's still been super efficient, which is good. And, I mean, he's been keeping this Blazers team in the playoff race without their best player in Damian Lillard. I mean, that's really impressive. I think he kind of had his best performance against the Magic the other day. He had 41 points, which is awesome, and he was still super efficient. So that's good to see from a guy like CJ McCollum. He's able to just kind of take over for Dame when he's out. The Blazers did get Damian Lillard back last night, which is going to be good, as the Blazers are definitely going to need him going down the stretch of the season in this playoff race. I mean, even it doesn't really matter how good CJ McCollum's playing. I mean, it's always nice to have Damian Lillard, who's probably definitely a top 10, maybe even a top 5 or 6 player in the NBA. Certainly doesn't hurt to have a guy like that back on your team. And then last guy who just has been absolutely killing it, mostly on the defensive end. But that's OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors. I mean, not a household name, certainly, but OG is having an absolute breakout season on the defensive end of the floor. He proved this week when he had a pretty solid game, 16 points, 9 rebounds against the Charlotte Hornets, but in addition to just those pretty solid points and rebounds, he had 6 steals, which is absolutely incredible. And believe it or not, he followed it up with an even more incredible game, both offensively and defensively. 32 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 steals. Absolutely amazing game from OG Anunoby. Back-to-back 6 and 7 steal games. I mean, I think OG is pretty much a lock to make all-defensive team this season. Should be the first of many of his still young career. OG Anunoby, absolutely balling out on the defensive end of the floor for the Toronto Raptors, who have struggled with injuries to so many of their guys. OG Anunoby has been one of the most consistent pieces for the Raptors this season, just bringing the effort on the defensive end of the floor, which is really good to see, and I do hope he gets rewarded for it with an all-defensive team. So as I mentioned last week, I kind of want to end these shows with like a random topic each and every time. So this week, the NBA sent out a memo to all the players and teams about the coronavirus, which is obviously like a very serious thing going on right now. I'm not trying to make a joke of it at all, but I mean, the NBA and kind of like everyone on Twitter and everyone in the world basically, they just keep saying like, make sure like you wash your hands for at least 20 seconds. And I don't know. And I've seen other people say this, but immediately like what went to my head is like, were people not washing their hands before there was a life-threatening disease? I mean, I don't know. Like, it just seems to me like washing your hands at least like 4 or 5 times a day is like pretty common practice. But I guess it needs to be emphasized for some reason. Yeah, but also, I mean, everyone's saying like 20 seconds. I don't know. I like washed my hands the other day like really slowly, and I was like counting, like just in my head, and I only got to like 17, 18 seconds. Like, I don't exactly know how you wash your hands for 20 seconds. I mean, that seems like a pretty long time. I guess they're just being like extra cautious. I think like 10 to 15 seconds is probably like a normal amount of time. I don't know. Also, like, more to do with the coronavirus, like I saw people on Twitter, like I saw this like picture of like a pharmacy, and like all like the hand sanitizer was like sold out, and it's like, I mean, yeah, it's like obviously scary, but I don't think, especially in North America, like, we really don't need to be like freaking out that much at this point. I mean, yeah, it's very scary, and it has the potential to become like a really scary thing. But I mean, as of now, it's not that big a deal here in North America. So I think people just need to kind of like calm down, just like be aware of what's going on. I mean, keep track of how the disease is progressing and stuff like that, and just, I mean, just chill out, I guess. And then just like wash your hands all the time, regardless if there's like a coronavirus or not. I mean, seems pretty self-explanatory to me. But with that said, I'm going to wrap up the podcast here. If you're interested in hearing some more of my thoughts about the NBA, feel free to head over to Fansided, check out my most recent articles. Recently I talked about why Nick Nurse should be the coach of the year. And as I mentioned earlier, I also wrote about some reasons for Russell Westbrook's recent explosion in production. Lastly, I have another piece coming out this weekend. I'm going to be talking about some of the most underrated performers so far this season, so be sure to check that out. Once again, thank you for tuning in to ISO Buckets. Remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, all that fun stuff. I'd really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next week.